Well, thank you, Lori, for joining the podcast today. And I know you actually have your own podcast, which is awesome. Before we dive into the substance of today's conversation, I actually have a podcast to podcast or host to host question. And
Great.
that is, where did you get your intro music?
Bobby, I have no idea. And I say that because I inherited my podcast
Oh,
from a
wow.
wonderful man who started it a while back and then realized he didn't want to do it all on his own. And
Hmm.
then he brought me on as a co-host. And then during the pandemic, he had to step aside and I invited my husband to co-host it with me. So the intro music predates me. I suspect that our wonderful podcast editor, Christy Hausler, found the music, but I was not responsible for it.
Wow. Okay. So that's really interesting because I got to figure out. I have an intro right now, and it's fine. But I need to turn off my notifications. I want to improve my intro though, and I just use some open source thing. So I figured I would ask, trying to get some
Can't
inspiration.
help you there, sorry. But there
No
are people who
worries.
are experts in this sort of thing, Bobby, so you can seek out one of the experts.
Everybody wants to talk, but nobody wants to listen. So here's my petition. Instead of division, let's make our mission to change the system. Learn how the world works. Learn how we can act. Welcome, everybody, to the Justice Podcast.
But the more important conversation is getting to what you are an expert in, and that is talking about parents who are working and kind of just the. Now I'm trying to like filter my language because I just listened to one of the episodes and like I know you the way you reframe the problem or the challenges is different because you talk about I think you mentioned something about it's not work-life balance, it's sometimes work-life enrichment.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, you
Exactly.
know what?
Yeah.
That's a good
Work-life
stepping off point.
integration. Yeah.
Let's talk about work-life enrichment and what does that mean?
Yeah. So I'm Lori Mihalich-Levin. I wear a couple of different hats in life. One is that I am a healthcare lawyer, but that's what I do on the side now. And the other piece of my life is running a program called Mindful Return that helps new parents transition back to work after parental leave and then helps support working parents on their journey. And what we're trying to encourage people to think about is that the skills that we gain through parenthood are directly useful and applicable on our jobs. And the things that we do in our jobs are also really helpful in parenthood. And so there's this idea that Dr. Yael Schonbrun has really made more popular recently. She has a new book out called Work, Parent, Thrive that talks about work-life enrichment, that by being a parent, I am enriching my work life. And by working, I am enriching parenthood. I definitely feel that way every day. When I shut down to have dinner with my kids every evening and I turn off my work brain, I'm able to recharge and, be filled with ideas about the world that has nothing to do with my work life. I get to practice all the skills of patience and diplomacy that are required at a dinner table with small children. And then, I get to sort of turn back on my work mode having parented. And so there are ways that one feeds into it and enriches the other. And we don't hear enough about that. We hear a lot about work-life conflict, but
Hmm.
there's a lot that one can support the other as well.
Why do you think that is that we don't hear about this enrichment side?
Because it's sexier to talk about the problems, right? And there is a lot, gosh, there are so many real problems in the world in which working parents are not being supported. We don't have paid parental leave in the United States, for example. There are documented motherhood biases in the workplace. There are also documented biases when fathers step up and say, hey, I'm a caregiver. And so there are real problems. And as you know, the news cycle likes to focus on problems more than on solutions. I think we've also been fed a line that we're supposed to be feeling guilty for working and also having children. And the more we can do to counter that sort of narrative, the more we'll perhaps hear about the work-life enrichment opportunities.
So, Laura, you mentioned a lot there that I want to dive into later in this conversation. But first, let's take a few steps back. I know you went through Georgetown Law, and you've had other excellent education even prior to that. But what was it that got you to be interested in this line of work, in this field?
Sheer desperation, Bobby. The wheels came off in our household when we had our first child, and I went back to work and my husband went back to work, both of us full time. And then we had another baby 2 years later, as one often does. And my husband and I like to say that 1 + 1 = 85. Like, the house was a disaster. And I really didn't know how I was going to manage it. I am certain that I had some undiagnosed postpartum anxiety, and I was really struggling in the early days of parenthood. I looked around for resources that could support me in the transition back to work after having a baby. And I found tons of baby-focused resources. That's cool. We need baby-focused stuff. But I didn't find anything that really got at the personal and professional identity transition that I was going through as I became a working parent. And all the advice I found was super snarky. It was like, don't put a photo of your kids on your desk, or you won't be taken seriously at work, or, you know, you might leak on your shirt when you're pumping. And I was like, this is just not helpful. So really, my interest in it was, oh my gosh, there's a huge gap. Nobody is supporting people through this transition. And what can I do to help make the transition back to work after parental leave easier?
So I understand, recognizing the problem or the difficulty. How did you start to make tangible steps to solutions?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I did was I took an online course back in the early days of my parenthood that was called the Abundant Mama Project. And it was all about helping us to find the abundance in life instead of just the overwhelm when we were like drowning in working parent chaos. And there were 100 different moms in this group. They were all over the world. They had kids of all different ages, and they were all feeling the struggle. And I thought to myself, wow, somebody really needs to create this type of course, this type of community, but specifically for the transition back to work after parental leave. And I'm a risk-averse lawyer. I wasn't really planning to do anything particularly about it, but my husband is an MBA, and he said to me, well, what are you going to do to meet this need? You've identified a crisis, clearly, and what are you going to do about it? And I thought about it long and hard, and I sat there. I remember sitting like on the green bedspread of our bed in the old house, and with my laptop, and my hands were shaking as I was like, I'm going to write a blog post. And of course, maybe 5 people in the world read that initial blog post, but it was terrifying to sort of put your own story out there and dare to try something. So I started blogging. I created a working parent group at my office. And then I set out to create this like online community and course that I had benefited so much from whenever I, took this Abundant Mama Project class. And I just started, recruiting people to it and saying like, hey, try this. It may help you with the return to work. And very quickly, there were employers that got interested and said, hey, we want to retain our working parent talent, and we think that your program can help us to do that. So we've grown over the past 9 years and now have 97 different employers that we partner with. But it all started off with me and the terrified blog post writing.
Wow. That's so cool. That's an inspiration for myself that I don't know what this will build into, but
you never know. Yeah. Baby steps.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. So you have this platform, maybe even, I know we're kind of jumping ahead, but
yeah, good.
What is it that you hope this platform or this message that you have will accomplish, let's say 5 years from now?
Yeah. I have 2 answers to that. One is that as many people as humanly possible can feel reassured and not alone and comforted and feeling like they have a real choice when they're returning to work after parental leave. And, there's a lot of isolation that happens in new parenthood. So my goal is for working parents to feel connected and feel supported. And in 5 years, for more parents to feel supported. The other answer to that question is another reason that I founded the program, which is really the Leaky Women's Leadership Pipeline. I am on a mission to make sure that that leak doesn't happen at the point when women are having children. And I would note that I think one of the best ways to move toward equality in our workplaces is to normalize caregiving for men and for women, to normalize the taking of parental leave for everyone. And so in 5 years, I would love to live in a world where it is normal for everyone to take parental leave and employers are able to retain as many amazing working parents as they can because the working parents feel confident to return to a supportive environment and one where they know that they will be valued.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge, and that's awesome to push for that, to be advocating for that right now, and growing your mission, moving forward. I guess maybe one of the things is on your episode of the podcast that I was listening to, I think it was like CEO Moms was the name of it. Great episode. I recommend the podcast, Parents at Work.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned in there was this management lottery. So it's like some managers are going to be really great. They're going to be flexible. They understand, oh, you've got kids. Okay, let's like shift your work hours or something if you need to put them to bed. But not everybody's going to have that. And I guess maybe my question to you, putting both your advocate hat on and also your lawyer hat on, of should we be leaving this to businesses and say, okay, yeah, like, businesses are doing a really great job. More employees will want to go there. And so maybe society evolves over time to where more and more employers are doing that? Or is that not enough? Should we be having other rules, laws, et cetera, to be a forcing function?
I think it's yes, and we need both of those things, right? I think we need paid parental leave, which I think is foundational and fundamental and should be a requirement that everyone, is able to take. We had some legislation that just recently passed that now requires employers to provide protection for up to 2 years of pumping milk after having a baby. And, it was people who pushed Congress to change the law to say 1 year isn't enough because people are sometimes going beyond that and are being discriminated against for breastfeeding beyond the year mark. And so I think we absolutely need national legislation, and individual employers need to take a close look at themselves. They need to look across like the divisions of a company and say, where are people staying and where are people really leaving? And then do targeted manager training to the departments where things aren't going so well. I think there are some folks who are perhaps going to behave badly regardless of the situation. There are some folks who are going to behave really well regardless of the situation and be really empathetic. And then there's a whole wide middle of people who want to do the right thing, but they're not quite sure what they should do. And sometimes managers end up making what they believe are benevolent assumptions about people. Oh, I want to protect her and make sure that she doesn't feel put upon, so I'm not going to send her on that trip that's coming up. Well, maybe it's a really fantastic business opportunity and she wants to go on that trip. So, it's sort of like teaching people how not to make assumptions that I think employers can work into their management and leadership training that they do for everyone who works there. So I think it's a both and, Bobby.
Yeah, what you're saying is it's reminding me of this constitutional law class that I'm taking right now, actually. And we're looking at these really old Supreme Court cases where they're ruling on these laws of like, should there be a minimum wage specifically for women, and like the justification, or like, should we limit women's hours because we need to protect these mothers? And this is
benevolent sexism, as they call it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh, this is, obviously society's evolved where you wouldn't say explicitly that now, but there's other issues like what you're saying.
There are people who feel like they get relegated to the quote unquote mommy track when they come back from leave and they don't get the choice assignments. And then no wonder they leave, because they're not able to take on challenging work because people aren't giving it to them anymore. So yeah, there's still a lot of that goes on.
So I guess what would your advice or maybe even demand of employers be to prevent this pseudo mommy track?
Yeah, I think it is, well, number one, get your leadership on message around the fact that working parents and new parents do not lose value simply because they have had a child. They are just as valuable and integral to the team, and get the leaders talking about this. Get the leaders to take parental leave. Like if you have, I've seen instances where a law firm, for example, has a male partner whose wife has a baby, and the male partner takes the full amount of leave. After that happens, all the associates on his team feel empowered to take their leave. So like have your leaders behave in the way that you want everyone to then model. I mean, manager training is another one, and providing supports to people to help them in the off-ramp and on-ramp period when they're coming back. Provide the employees with a soft re-entry so that you can have a ramp up or a phase back period when you're coming back. Also, just communicating the message that we believe in you as a working parent. We want you to come back. We want you to stay. We know you have value here. A lot of working parents think, well, now that I have this child, I just am not as valuable in the workplace, and their confidence gets really shaken. And so anything you can do to reignite the confidence of the new parents and tell a different narrative, I think is the shift and the change that I wish would happen in the world.
Do you feel like there's resistance to this idea or this concept, or is it more a lack of knowledge of what to do?
It's both. I think it depends on the circumstances. There are people who honestly don't know what they might do to make the situation better and feel as though maybe they get blindsided, or they don't know that they should be saying different things or not making certain assumptions. And then there are other people who, I know you don't want to put people into us and them categories, Bobby, so we're not going to do that. But there are leaders who I think perhaps are sometimes of a different generation, where it's like, no, you need to come back and be the exact same person you were whenever you left. And if you don't like functioning the way that you used to, even though your whole life is different, then you can go somewhere else. And so, I mean, then the employee really has a choice as to whether they want to stay and behave as though they have no children, or to find a place that's willing to be more flexible with them.
Yeah. I think not going to justify, treating people differently because they have kids. I guess maybe not even devil's advocate, but just trying to explore what might cause somebody to resist this. Something I was thinking about in preparing for this interview is I could see how a small business would have some fear or some worries compared to a large corporation that feels like, okay, this is just another cost, we can bear it, versus a small business, maybe they feel like, oh, if we have to adjust, we're adjusting for, if you have a 10-person company, one person has a kid and that shifts a little bit, it feels like a bigger change than an Amazon or something that's like, okay, yeah, that's one of our thousands of employees. How would you approach a manager or an owner in a small business who is at least proportionally for their workforce feeling like they're dealing with a bigger problem?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'll say is that the data bears out the idea that you have more efficient, effective, and loyal members of your team if you are willing to afford flexibility. So it is really sort of a business case for flexibility. It is not just about parenthood. And that's, one thing I tell people who on a team can be resentful when someone goes on leave and then suddenly they have all sorts of work that's dumped on them. The answer, I think the narrative that has to happen there is anyone could have to take a leave for any reason. You might have a parent yourself who's in their 80s who has health issues that you need to attend to. You may have a diagnosis that you need to go attend to. It is not about being a parent necessarily. It is about being a human, right? And I think to the extent you have a 10-person team, you almost have more flexibility in terms of how you operate your business, and you don't have to have standards and procedures that apply to like 50,000 employees, and you can navigate and negotiate among the team. There's a story I like to tell. I was at a couple 100-person trade association, and I asked when I returned from work, this is at a pre-COVID time when people weren't working remotely, but I asked, may I have Fridays working from home for the first couple of months after I come back from parental leave just to smooth my transition? And a colleague of mine said, whoa, that is not fair. Like, I don't have kids. I don't get to work from home on Fridays. Like, not okay. And I said to her, have you ever asked for the flexibility to work from home on Fridays? And she was like, well, no. And she went and asked, and the supervisor was like, yeah, sure. Okay. So we can incorporate a culture of flexibility regardless of parental status. And it's not that the working parent is getting less work done and therefore, minimizing or causing chaos on the team. Working parents tend to be way, way more efficient than they used to be because they know they have to get stuff done. There's no time for office gossip. There's no time for drama. You just get the work done and you move on. I think where I ran into trouble in the legal world is that it's based on the billable hour at a lot of law firms. And the more efficient you become, the less rewarded you are in that environment by billable hour totals. So I think that is a struggle for many working parents. But to the small business owner, there are many business reasons to afford flexibility. Keep your smart, brilliant, and dedicated employees, and afford some flexibility to everybody because everyone has a life outside of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting how you bring this into the concept or the value of being human, and how we have varying needs that arise in our volatile lives that are beyond just being parents. I do want to get to the point you were saying about the billable hour, which interestingly, I think it's like it exists at these, really high paying law firms, but it also exists in the sense of people who are working hourly jobs. And so as far as like pay scale, it's not just, the rich or the middle class or lower class. So how would somebody approach this challenge or this issue in a situation like that, where it really is, hey, it comes down to the hours?
Yeah. And, there might be different answers depending on the type of industry or the type of work the person is doing. In the billable hour situation, I mean, I was a huge advocate of, and when I was a partner at a law firm, benefited from the idea of flat fee arrangements. There are other ways to bill, right? You can come up with a fee that you and the client agree to, and that makes sense for their budget and yours. And then you can get the project done efficiently and not be rewarded based on the number of hours. I mean, it sounds revolutionary, but it's just another way of coming up with a price tag that a lot of other industries actually use.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm firmly of the belief that the law firm system was set up for people who didn't have home responsibilities to just maximize the amount of time that they spent, working at their desk. And it's not a system that was really built around the lives of working parents who want to be engaged in caregiving, for example. When we're talking about maybe hourly workers, for example, what we hear is that it really helps for people to know their schedule a certain number of weeks in advance. Oftentimes people who are working shifts, for example, don't know until right before they have the shift, what time they need to show up, et cetera. To the extent you can have job sharing options and pairing people together and being more thoughtful and intentional about when someone is going to have to work so that they can come up with childcare plans. I mean, we could do a whole conversation just about the massive childcare shortage right now, but it's a dire problem. There are not enough childcare workers right now to be able to take care of the children who need it, and the parents who need it to be able to go back to work. So I'm not going to go on that tangent, but I think there are different solutions depending on the type of role we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think bringing it back to your point earlier of these are human problems.
Yes.
Even if I don't have kids, I want to be able to know my schedule in advance if possible.
Yes. Right.
That's just better for me too.
Yeah.
I think this is really great to kind of flesh out and think, okay, where are we really just trying to communicate and balance a life that's not just work?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess. So you mentioned a few other issues, and we can't dive into everything.
No.
Because even what we're talking about right now, there's so much more we could discuss. But I mean, in regards to childcare, maternity leave, or paternity, parental leave.
Parental, yeah.
And there, even just working with people as they come back and not creating this separate pipeline. if legislators are starting to think about this, and I know some of them already are, some of them
Oh, yeah.
a little bit behind the curve, but if they're looking forward and thinking, we can pick one issue to think about right now. Obviously, it's not actually this dichotomy of we can only solve one problem, but if they're like, where can I get the most bang for my buck? Where do you feel like these lawmakers should focus their efforts first?
Yeah, paid parental leave for everyone for the first, I don't know, I'll go out there and just say first 12 weeks of a child's life. Paid. Moms, dads, everybody paid. I mean, the amount of time it takes just to recover from childbirth is insane. And right now you have this patchwork of parental leave supports all over the country where, in New York, you have paid parental leave, and then in California, you have a different policy. And let's raise the bar. Did you know that the average mom in the United States returns to work 2 weeks after having a child? Average. Wow. Because she can't afford to stay away from the job 2 weeks. Like, puppies are not allowed to be separated from their mother until 9 weeks after birth. Like, it's just not human. So paid parental leave is where I would start, absolutely, in Congress. And I live in DC, so I know these things take a while, and sometimes it does feel like you just have to choose one thing.
Sure. Yeah, 2 weeks. That's quick.
Yeah. Can you imagine what your body feels like after pushing out a several pound human being and then trying to keep them alive?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Wow. Even, like you're saying, obviously it's not something I'm going to have to experience in my life, but it's just a lot. I don't have any other way to say it.
Exactly.
Wow.
So not okay. Yes, we are like one of 3 industrialized countries in the world that doesn't have a paid parental leave policy.
So then, to wrap up our conversation, I mean, that's a really powerful message that you just shared. Are there any other words of wisdom or thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'd say if there's any person who is a working parent who is listening, know that there are people out there cheering you on and who are here to support you through your working parent journey, and that you don't have to do it alone. I think I felt very isolated and hated that feeling. And I'd say if you have any working parent colleagues in your life, whether it's a coworker or someone you're managing, like, check in on them and ask them, like, really real, honestly, how are you doing right now? And, are there any changes in your schedule or whatever that we can make, even marginally on the ends, that can make things work a little bit better for you? Just like have an awareness that maybe you shouldn't schedule meetings at 5:30 p.m. when people are trying to put food in front of their kids. And just ask good questions of your team. Ask
good questions. I think that's great advice for all sorts of issues.
Yes, exactly. Indeed.
Awesome. Well, Lori, thank you so much for your time today. This was a great conversation.
Super fun, Bobby. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. I'll see you later.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
This isn't financial, legal, or medical advice, but we do discuss how we might invest our resources for a healthier society. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic and other public policy issues, check out the website, thejusticepodcast.com.